So just... Just gonna wait a couple minutes for the people to be able to sign in, and then we'll get started.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Frank McCowan, and I am the Vice President of the International Dyslexia Association Florida branch. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the first of our Lunch and Learn webinars for 2021. We'll be conducting these webinars on the second Saturday of each month through November. Please check our website and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, as we'll be posting links to register for upcoming webinars regularly. And now I have the honor of introducing Dr. Judith Cohen, our featured presenter today. Dr. Cohen is the Director of Clinical Experiences and teaches many courses in the Special Education program at the School of Education and Human Development at Florida International University in Miami, Florida. Prior to her work at Florida International University, Dr. Cohen was a classroom teacher and a clinician at the McGlannon School for 20 years, which is a school for students with dyslexia. Where she taught students with learning disabilities, dyslexia, and related language and reading disabilities. She's an accomplished author and has presented at numerous conferences and professional development workshops, both locally and nationally. Her research focuses on research-based strategies that promote student growth in language and literacy, particularly for students with dyslexia. Dr. Cohen also serves as the president of the International Dyslexia Association Florida branch. And so now it's my pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Judith Cohen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank, for that lovely introduction. And welcome everybody to, as Frank said, our first Lunch and Learn for 2021. Our title is Dyslexia and Structured Literacy, What Every Parent and Teacher Should Know. So we're going to just get started here. As Frank said, we're welcoming you to the first of several Lunch and Learn webinars. Again, be prepared to get further information through our website and Instagram and Facebook for the second Saturday of the month. And we ask you to please join us for these exciting sessions. So here we go. Today's takeaway is just an overview. We're going to go over what is dyslexia, and just for a very simple definition to get started, we know it's a language-based disability, neurobiological in origin, that affects phonemic awareness, word recognition, and spelling. The other main topic we're going to mention is the science of reading, which has been going on for 40 plus years. And the official definition as of last month, I believe, is that it is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. And then I'd like to focus the most of this session regarding structured literacy, the content, the principles, and hopefully lots of strategies that will help you as parents and educators working with your children and or students. Okay, so we're going to get started with a poll, but first I just want to share, we know that literacy begins at birth and is a lifelong process. And of course I have to share my little grandson. This is little Jude here with his mama. When he was about 5 months old, and I think that was Goodnight Moon that she was reading to him. And here he is a little bit later on, about 2.5, almost 3, reading to his little friend at daycare. And yes, so we know that literacy begins at birth and it continues on and on and on. So before we continue, I'm going to ask Frank to post a poll. We just have 3 little questions that we would like you to respond to, if you don't mind. we'll just wait another maybe 30 seconds and then we can see the results and get an idea of who is here and what your background is. Okay, Frank, would you like to post the results and see where we are with our group?
So we had 80% of our attendees are teachers or educators. 20% are both parents and teachers educators. 40% of our participants say that they have a good understanding of the knowledge of dyslexia. And 60% say that they have a great knowledge of dyslexia and could teach others. And then lastly, we've got 40% say that their knowledge of structured literacy is good, but they want to learn more. And 60% say that their knowledge is great and they could teach others.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful. But hopefully you'll still be able to learn a little something from our little webinar today. All right, so thank you for participating in that. And I know we'll probably have some folks joining us a little bit later. And just again, so that you know, we plan to go till about 12:30 and then open it up for some questions. If you have any questions, you can post them in the Q&A or the chat. And I think Frank is going to be checking that as we go. And again, if you have any individual questions, I'm happy to stay on later, or you can contact me directly. So here we go. So let's start out by doing a little fact or fib. I'm just going to go through this quickly because, again, many of you know a lot about dyslexia, but just as a little refresher, revisit, and for those of you who maybe have heard some of these things, but you're not really sure which way to go. So I'll read them, and then you can either, I don't see you, so I'm just going to ask you to do a thumbs up, thumbs down in your own little house, wherever you are. And let's talk about these for just a few minutes. So seeing letters or words backwards is a characteristic of dyslexia. Is that a fact or a fib? We know that most folks out in the general public or in our communities probably still think that this is what it is, but I'm sure that you know that that is a fib. We know that a lot of students who are still learning to read, even they may be in even first or second grade, they still may be seeing letters or words backwards, but that does not mean that they are dyslexic, right? And I hope you all agree with me on that. Number two, children can outgrow dyslexia. What do we think about that? Fact or fib? Again, that is a fib, even though many of our students do learn to read at a very appropriate grade level, and they are able to spell and write and do all those wonderful things. There's always something that lingers. Many times it's spelling or actual creative writing, but many times our students become very famous, successful, and that's what we want for each of our students and or children. The third one, dyslexic parents are more likely than non-dyslexic parents to have children with dyslexia. I think we all know that that one is hold on, why is that one coming out red? Dyslexic parents are more likely than non-dyslexic parents to have children with dyslexia. That one is a fact, and I apologize for the red, that should be green. All right, and I think we know that dyslexia is genetic and that it can go for many generations. Number four, dyslexia can be caused by a literacy poor home environment. For example, not reading to children. We know that that is a fib. Because we know it is neurobiological. And one of the major reasons for dyslexia caused difficulties is due to visual problems. Again, a lot of folks think that's what it is, but we know that it is not. It is a language-based disability. Okay, so I don't know what happened to our colors there, but let's keep going. Number six, individuals with dyslexia have difficulty with decoding and or word recognition. We know indeed that that is what many of our students with dyslexia struggle with. Dyslexia is a disability specific to the English language. No, it exists across countries, languages, cultures. I'm just going to go quickly now because we have a lot to cover and maybe not enough time. Children who are dyslexic tend to have lower IQ scores than children who are not dyslexic. That actually is a fib. We know we have many children who are dyslexic who are gifted, and we have a term for them called twice exceptional. So we do know that IQ doesn't really have anything to do with dyslexia. Dyslexia is a learning disability that affects language processing. We know that is definitely a fact. And children with dyslexia also have problems with spelling. Indeed, they do. And in fact, spelling tends to be the thing that really lasts the longest through adulthood. And we also know that spelling is probably the least indicative of intelligence. So you could be a poor speller and still be a very intelligent, bright person. So that was just a little review, and we hope everybody was very, whoops, there we go, familiar with this information. All right, so again, we'll just quickly go over what dyslexia is. We know it's a language-based problem, does not mean seeing things backwards. It exists across all levels of intelligence. It's not caused by a lack of motivation. It's just the opposite. Many of our students are motivated. In fact, I don't think I've ever met a child who did not want to learn to read. It occurs at all socioeconomic levels, occurs slightly more often in boys than in girls, and that kind of depends on the research you read. May occur even with good classroom instruction, and it can be a part of other disorders, and that's called comorbidity. For example, attention deficit disorder. Okay, now we know that early intervention is critical. Oh, and by the way, I know some people probably want to know, will the PowerPoint be available? I meant to say this at the beginning. Yes, it will be posted on our website, along with about 5 or 6 other resources that probably will be informational for you. If not, you can share it with others if you are familiar with it. So early intervention is critical. And before I even go on with that, I just want to read a little poem. I like to include a little poem or a story in all my presentations, because after all, this is about literacy. And this actually came from Lisa McGregor, who is the author of a new book called A New Alphabet for Humanity, which I try to share with every student, parent, teacher, whenever I get the opportunity, because I think this is going to change the world. If we can get this book into the hands of every parent and teacher, it is an ABC book, an alphabet book. I do collect them, but this one has words that are so beautiful and so important to how we would like our children to grow up. So for example, C is for compassion, D is for diversity, E is for empathy, F is for forgiveness, and so forth, kind, loving, mindful, nurturing, peaceful, respectful, all these wonderful words, these feelings that we want our children to start incorporating into their own bodies and their own brains and their own minds, for the future. And then she just published a little poem that I'd like to read to you. And it's also part of the resources that you'll be able to get later on through our website. They should be available by next week. So the name of the poem is Our Children Are the Future. As parents, we teach our children every day that being grateful is the way. We live from our hearts and show our love for ourselves, the earth, and the sky above. Our children know how much they are loved and how much we support the things they dream of. We commit to empathy and compassion to show our children love in action. We live each day with peace of mind while we teach our children to be generous and kind. We show our children we can all work together to heal the earth and make it better. We're holding space for a future that's bright and encourage our children to shine their light. We're changing the world by changing our ways, and the legacy we leave will be brighter days for our children, for their children, and future generations. So I just thought it was, since we do have parents as well as educators, with us today. I just love that poem. And again, something I just wanted to share with all of you. So going back to early intervention, we know how critical this is. And just a few statistics here. Longitudinal studies show that of the children who are reading disabled in grade 3, 74% will remain disabled in grade 9 unless we do something about it. And that means provide effective intervention. Children identified as reading disabled after second grade rarely catch up to their peers. But we don't want to stay here on a negative note. We want to see, well, what can we do about this, right? So we know the home literacy environment can be an even stronger predictor of literacy and academic achievement than family income. So we want to show our children and our students what reading is all about. And the best way to do it is to model it, to enjoy it. So again, with early literacy, we know it consists of experiences during those first years of life that build the foundation for later reading and writing. The more literacy experiences children have at home, the better prepared they'll be for school. And I'm sure we've all read articles like the Hart and Risley study, where the more hours of language that happen in the home, particularly using quality, positive affirmations with our children, the better prepared they are when they come into the classroom. So early literacy is key. And I always feel that we should have our very, very best teachers in pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade classrooms, because that's where those foundational skills happen, and they're so important. One of the things we have said for many, many years is the single most important activity for building the knowledge required for eventual success in reading is reading aloud to children, starting with very little ones and all the way through adulthood. That doesn't mean we stop when they're in first grade. Reading to children, reading with our children is critical. And that's also a way to build up that knowledge, that background knowledge that is so key. And so many people are talking about today. For example, Natalie Wexler in her book, Knowledge Gap. We want to encourage families and teachers to continue to share what's going on in science and social studies and literature and in the world, so that when they do read, particularly nonfiction, they'll be able to connect with that information. So it's another important thing to remember. Okay. Language components, I put this slide in here because I just want to remind all of us that when we talk about language, we're talking about two different levels. We're talking about oral, which is listening and speaking, and written, which is reading and writing. Now, many times when our students get into school, say first grade and above, we're focusing more on the reading and the writing. But if we look back into their histories, we can probably find that many of those same students were seen by speech pathologists, or they had different types of therapy where they were working with their oral language, their listening and their speaking. Okay, and then the other way we can look at this is we can look at receptive language, which is everything that comes into our systems, right? And in this case, it would be listening and reading. And then our expressive language is the output. So everything that we speak and that we write that comes from us to the world. So these are important things to think about and to see how they're related in our individual students. By the way, from now on, everything that you see in green, I love color highlighting, has to do with oral, right? The oral language, the listening and the speaking, the phonological awareness that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And when we're talking about the letters, the print, the graphemes, that'll be in blue. So that'll reflect reading and writing. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about foundations of early literacy. And I know we have some parents on board, and teachers can share this with the parents they work with as well. We know that there are three main topics. The first is oral language. And then together with that, we have phonological awareness, which is also oral, but just more specific, right? And then the third one is print knowledge. And we know from research that phonological awareness and print knowledge are the two best predictors of reading ability or disability. So we want to focus on these early literacy components from the time we bring our babies home from the hospital, till they, forever, for as long as they're with us, right? We want to give them that strong foundation so that when they get to school, they can pick up and move forward. So what do we mean when we're talking about oral language? Again, we're talking about listening and speaking. So when we're talking about listening and speaking, a couple of the terms that I've heard and that I really like are literacy events, right? Literacy events can be, little kids playing together. It can be grand conversations between us or between our children or our students. When we go shopping to the food store, or, we go to the park, we use language. We talk about, the different types of fruit, vegetables. If we're in the food store, if we're in the park, we talk about going up the steps of the slide and sliding down, or on the swing, we're going back and forth, and use words like that so students start understanding. Prepositions are one category that are very difficult for many of our students. So we want to have these grand conversations with our students. Even doing something simple like sorting laundry, right? We can have the kids put all the socks together, put all the dark clothes together, all the white clothes together. We can have them sort socks in pairs. I mean, so many things that we just do as normal living in our homes and in our schools can become part of these literacy events or grand conversations. But the important thing is to use language. That's the job of children, to develop language. So important. And then when we look at phonological awareness, which comes from that oral language, we teach kids to listen. And by the way, when I say kids, I say that very lovingly. I have 2 of my own adult children. So I know some people don't care for that term, but I do it with love, just so that you know. So when we start focusing more on phonological awareness, and this can start as early as pre-K, we're listening to the sounds of language in sentences. So if you say, I like pizza, and the child can say, I like pizza, and that's 3 words, we're starting to work on the larger parts of phonological awareness. Then we also talk about rhyming words. And again, not reading them, not looking at the letters, but listening to them. All of this is about sounds. All of it is oral. Then we start getting further down into syllables or parts of words, and then maybe beginning sounds. And we'll talk about this in more detail as we move on. But this is just the beginning piece for the early literacy connections at home. So what are some things we can do at home or even in our pre-K kindergarten classrooms? Say a sentence and count words with blocks. So every time, we say a sentence, we might say, my cat had kittens. We can use something like magnets, and we can just have them push it up. My cat had kittens. How many words did I just hear? 1, 2, 3, 4 words. We can have kids clap. We can have them stand up, sit down with words. The more we get them involved with their own bodies and using their own names, the better. And I always like to say, I say to my students, when we're little, the world should be all about us. But sometimes we see adults who are still at that stage, they haven't gone past that all about me yet. But with little kids, we want it to be all about them. That is very appropriate. So that's how we would count words in a sentence. We can listen, well, I'm saying look, but using objects or pictures, look and listen for rhyming words. For example, I can say, I see a sock. Can you find a rock? Sock and rock rhyme. And I would set up my house or my classroom with lots of little objects like a block and a lock and whatever rhymes with whatever it is we're talking about, and make it fun. How many awk words can you find? And then listen for syllables. We can do something as simple as using our fists, what we call break and make words. So for example, if this is my lunchbox, let's listen. How many little words are in lunchbox? My big word is lunchbox. Let's break it. Lunchbox. Let's make it. Lunchbox. And it's very simple. You don't need any materials. But if you do have something like little I call these pop-em blocks. A lot of the kids I've worked with really like these. So we could try it with another compound word. Let's say milkshake. So first we start with our whole word, milkshake. Then we break it. And what do we hear? Milkshake. Then we make it. What's our big compound word? Milkshake. Very simple, having fun, developmentally appropriate, no letters, no words, no print, no worksheets, right? We can do this also with music. We can sing songs and have kids listen to words and parts of words. We can also play beginning sound games, like let's see how many objects we can find that start like my child's name is David. Well, then how many words that start with D can I find in my house? Okay, so very simple little activities that we can do. We can call them strategies, activities, but it's building up that knowledge base in what we call phonological awareness. And then that third one was print knowledge. And I think most of us as parents and as teachers are more familiar with the print, with the letters of our alphabet than we are with the sounds or the phonemes. So we are going to look at them, in more depth as we go on. But we know that we have 26 letters, and those letters, either by themselves or in combination, represent the sounds of language. And we know, according to reading researchers, that there are 44 sounds in our English language. We also use print knowledge through environmental print. So if we go past Burger King or McDonald's or Toys R Us, and our little ones start pointing out, look, mommy, McDonald's or Burger King or whatever, I really don't think they're sounding out for McDonald's when they're 2 and 3 and maybe even 4, but they see that environmental print. The only problem with that is we have to get kids off that thinking once they start reading, because we don't want kids to think that a word is like a puzzle piece, right? There are components to every word, and those are called sounds, the phonemes, and the letters that represent them, the graphemes. And then we start introducing them to words and to letters. And if they still watch Sesame Street and they, listen to the letter of the day, kids can start learning the letters as well. Now, some people, this a little controversial, some people say start with the uppercase letters and others say lowercase. Personally, I think we need to introduce both. And I would even focus more on the lowercase, because once we start reading in books, most of the letters are lowercase, except for, of course, the first letter of the word in a sentence or someone's name, proper nouns. So we can think about that as well. And then with alphabet knowledge, again, we can sing. Bringing music and hands-on manipulatives to whatever we do is critical. So if we even, as we're showing the letters, instead of one strip of 26 across, my music, I'm a little challenged in music, but I'm going to just show you how this works. So if we set up our letters in the way we sing them, it really helps kids build those connections. So if we go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. So again, as we sing, as we point, then the kids can make those connections, other than thinking LMNOP is one letter, right? So alphabet knowledge is important. And then how can we play with letters? Well, I'm sure these are things that we've all done. Put magnetic letters on the refrigerator to spell your child's name, talk about the letters, what they look like, how they sound, how they feel. We can even have little, using like baking sheets or little magnetic boards with different letters, magnetic letters or letter tiles, and have kids play with them and name them and, see how many letters they know that are in their name. Just very simple hands-on manipulatives. Provide paper and crayons and markers for children to, quote, write words or scribble. Let them see what their names look like, the names of their siblings. Have a birthday or a holiday wish list and write a letter to relatives, so they start understanding that the words they see in print represent the sounds of the words that they're either listening to or that they're speaking themselves. And then this one here, how do we go from sounds to letters? And this is something very, I wouldn't say very new, but I know back in the day when I first started at FIU back in 1971, I don't know if I should date myself, but for those of you who are familiar with FIU, it was just very, very new back then. And when I started, there was maybe one, and the second building was just coming up. But back then, when I was in my undergrad program, we learned that you show the letter first, like this is the letter B and it says B, right? But now it's been turning around so that we go from the sound to the letter. So, and that makes sense because again, when we bring our babies home from the hospital, we don't say, oh, look, baby, this is the letter M, and this is the letter you're going to use when you start saying ma, 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 or D for dad, 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 right? We just talk, they listen, we go from sound to the letter. So it's just appropriate that when we start teaching about sounds and letters, we start with the sound and then we show the child the letter that represents those sounds. So as I said before, one or more letters represent the 44 sounds in our English language. So whenever we have those slanty parallel lines, we say the sound m. So in this case, it's represented by one letter M, but the sound sh, even though it's two letters, it's only one sound or one phoneme. So it is represented by two letters. And at some point, children do start recognizing these pieces of our language. So we know that spelling and reading go hand in hand. Another word for spelling is encoding, and another word for reading is decoding or word recognition. So we want to say that they are reciprocal processes, and the more we teach the decoding, the better they get at encoding. The more we do the spelling, the better they get at reading. So we want to point to letters, sort them, name them, make it fun. Start matching the sound and the letters. So when we hear the k, at, that together and tell us that word, k, at, cat. Again, when I said before, break it and make it, I always tell the students the big grown-up word for that is segmenting and blending. So as adults, parents, and teachers, we use those words. But with our little ones, the break it and make it makes a lot more sense. So very important. And then I think this is the last slide I have here for the early intervention piece. Skywrite letters in the air. And I know some of you have been taught, to put out your dominant hand with your child using your two pointer fingers and then hold down the top part of your arm, which makes you get a better feel for whatever letter you are forming. So if we were working with the letter B, for example, we would say, let's start at the top, come down, back up, around, and touch. So by verbalizing the letter formation, by skywriting it, by tracing letters using various textures, like for example, raw rice, put it in a tray and have the child feel the shape of the letters that they're forming. Or I know some people say sandpaper, but I found a lot of students, and myself personally, I don't like that texture. And for many students who may be on the spectrum, I know that they have that sensitivity to certain textures. So we have to be careful. One of the things a lot of teachers use, you can use at home, is shaving cream, which smells good. It cleans off your table and it's a very smooth texture. So a lot of students like using that. And of course, if you know your child's not allergic to any type of pudding, you can use pudding or food items to do this, but we usually don't do that in the classroom. We can color highlight specific features, like you'll see in a little bit. I always color highlight vowels in red, and you'll see why. And then we want to have our students practice with different writing tools, crayons, pens, markers, colored pencils, chalk, that outside sidewalk chalk is really good. And also to make sure that they hold their pencil correctly. I was talking to my students last night in class, and we were talking about, the children who hold their pencils like this, and they hold it so tight that they can't write. They say, oh, my hand hurts, it's so tired. Well, if we start with the correct way to position the pencil in our hand, even using a pencil grip, it's much better to do it early on than to try to reteach it later. It's very hard to break some of those habits that students have been using, for a long time. So that part was kind of geared to homes and early literacy instruction. And now I'm going to move into now what happens when our children get to school, whether it's pre-K, kindergarten. So literacy in schools. So we know, according to research, and these numbers vary a little bit depending on which article you read, 80 to 85% of students with an identified specific learning disability have a primary problem with reading and or language. That's a large chunk of students, right? And then according to IDA, they say 1 in 5 or up to 20%, so 10 to 20% or 1 out of every 5 to 10 students has some symptoms of dyslexia. Now we know that's also kind of on a spectrum, so it can be from mild to more severe. But that's a lot of students. And the unfortunate part is a lot of teachers aren't prepared to teach our students the way they need to be taught. So again, just a little bit here, what is dyslexia? This came from IDA website, so I'm giving them credit for it, but we know that dyslexia is difficulty with words. Why do we want to define it? Because there are lots of myths and misconceptions out there, even those fact and fib little statements that we did at the beginning. We want to make sure, and our goal, one of our goals as IDA Florida branch, is to get this information out to families, to communities, to teachers, to administrators, to the State Department of Education. And we're working really hard trying to make all those connections. And we want to enable research on the value of educational treatments because we know how critical they are. So again, we know it's a specific learning disability. So if a child has an IEP, it's going to come under the main category of SLD or specific learning disability, but dyslexia is a subtopic of SLD. Okay, we know it's neurobiological in origin. We know it's inaccurate or non-fluent word recognition. There's a deficit in spelling and decoding, in phonological component, and it's often unexpected because many times, like I said before, many of our students are gifted, so they do have high intelligence, but the academic achievement isn't always aligned with that, particularly in the reading and writing. Okay. And the secondary consequences can be found in comprehension as well as vocabulary. And that's because if our children find it difficult to read, they're not going to choose to read. Think of something that you as an adult maybe don't like doing. Well, if you were told you had to do that 8 or 9 hours a day, you'd probably get tired and frustrated too. Right? So we have our students reading all day in school, they come home, they have to do homework. So of course that's going to impact, there's going to be secondary consequences. So if they don't read on their own, and if no one's reading to them at their appropriate grade level, they're going to lose out the information as far as vocabulary and knowledge. There's something called the Matthew effect, which I'm sure some of you have heard about. It comes from the Bible, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The same thing happens in reading. So kids who are good readers and they choose to read and they read like crazy, they finish one chapter book and they get the next one. Well, what are they doing? They're building up that vocabulary that's in their brain, in their mental lexicon, their dictionary vocabulary in their brains. But some of our kiddos who find reading so difficult choose not to read. So if they choose not to do it, and then if no one else is reading to them, that knowledge gap maybe starts out little, but by the time they're in middle school and high school, it gets larger and larger. So that's what we mean by secondary consequences. We know that our students can understand when we read to them, but can they comprehend and understand when they read on their own? Many times that answer is no. I'm not going to read this to you, but if you're interested, this is the official 2002 IDA definition of dyslexia. It'll be there. And then here's our friends, Drs. Sally and Bennett Shaywitz, who have spent the last, 40 years of their lives studying and doing research on dyslexia. Dr. Sally Shaywitz wrote a book back in 2003, I think, the first version of Overcoming Dyslexia, and the new version just came out last year, second edition. And she says reading is an extraordinary ability, peculiarly human, and yet distinctly unnatural. And that I put that in red for a reason. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, those of you who were teaching maybe back then, remember when whole language was very, very prominent, and people would say, oh, just read to them, have a print-rich environment in your classroom, and the kids will pick up reading. You don't need to teach phonics. Don't worry about any of those sound symbol things. That's not really important. If kids can learn to speak, they can learn to read. Well, unfortunately, that was totally wrong, totally not research-based or evidence-based. And unfortunately, a lot of students went through their schooling during that time, and they end up in high school and they still can't read a multisyllabic word because they don't understand why the letters represent the sounds and how that all fits together. So it's not natural. And that's something we have to share with all our teachers and our families. Most students need to be taught how to read, okay? And part of that reason is because reading, our brains were not set up to read. They were set up to speak and to listen. And if we even look back in history, we notice that, even though people have been alive for, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and they've used oral language, but written language hasn't been around that long. I mean, they say about 3,000 to 5,000 years, I believe. So again, that sounds like a long time, but our brains still are not set up for that reading. So we have to, and some of our kids, we say we have to reroute the way their brain takes in language and how they process it. So of course I can't do any presentation without a couple of brain slides. So this one actually came from Guinevere Eden's work, and Dr. Eden is amazing. If you've ever heard her speak, she's so fascinating. And I always have to give a little side story that one year I was at an IDA conference. I don't even remember where it was, but I shared a taxi cab with her, and she was she is the nicest person around. She's like, just so nice. So I have to share this slide just so that you all know. So this is what a typical reader's brain would look like. It's from the left side. So it would be like, this way, my left side. And this is the front, and this is the back. And this is what good readers do. I mean, it's a lot more complicated. I am not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to explain it. But what I am going to say is look at the dyslexic reader's brain. Only this front part is lighting up. So this happens when they put children or adults through a functional MRI machine, similar to any MRI machine any of you have maybe participated in or experienced, and they give them some type of literacy activity to do, whether it's reading or rhyming or some activity, and it takes pictures. They see what lights up in the brain when they're doing these activities. Well, for typical readers, this is what it looks like. Okay. And for our dyslexic readers, this is what it looks like. And this is really sad because what happens up here, up in the front, is like if a child sees the word cat and they go to sound it out and they go, k-a-t. Okay, that's what's happening up here, but it's not connecting to anything here. And it's definitely not back here, what we call the word form area, where we store all the words that we know. So, again, we can talk about this, as scientists, another time, but I just want to show the differences. And so what I say to my teachers, my pre-service teachers, I say, this is what your job is in the classroom, to get your kids from here to here in the most efficient way. And how do we do that? By teaching structured literacy, which we're going to get to in a little bit. So this is what we want to do. We want to get kids to be able to sound out words, to have them in that brain, that left hemisphere, but then to store them as sight words back here in that word form area. And when we talk about sight words, we're not talking about irregular words like enough. We're talking about any word that once you see it, you can recognize it immediately. So if I see this word neurobiological, I can't tell my brain, don't process it, because I know what that word is. So I can't not read it. And that's where we want all our students to get to, so that they have this really, really large bunch of words back here in the word form area that they see immediately within a second or two. And they don't have to take time or brain energy and power to sound it out. So a lot of research has been done and is still ongoing. I would venture to say that probably billions of dollars have been spent in the last 40 to 50 years learning so much about how children learn to read, what good readers do, and then what struggling readers, experience. So did you know that 1 in 5 kids are dyslexic? We already mentioned that. But did you know that 1 in 100 teachers might know what dyslexia is? So imagine one of these 5 kiddos here could be dyslexic, and 1 out of 100 teachers might know what it is. And even if they know what it is, I wonder, do they know what to do about it? So we say, if this were just geared to teachers, I would say professional development is the key. We need to provide explicit, systematic professional development, not just to our little kiddos, but to our educators, to our teachers, to our administrators, so that they understand what it is and what we can do about it. So again, I'll go through these quickly because I'm sure most of you already know this, but preschool and kindergarten, these are just a few characteristics. Late learning to talk or slow to learn new words, trouble producing speech sounds. These are the kids who have trouble, with certain sounds. Like when my son was little, he had a lot of fluid in his ears and he couldn't say the k sound. So his name is David Michael Cohen. So he would say, my name is David Michael Cohen, because he couldn't say the k sound. Now, I took him to my friend, the speech pathologist. We found out he had fluid in his ear. They put tubes in. It was a very stressful day in my life, but thank goodness, it was fixed. That's a fixable thing, physiological, biological kinds of things like that. But our children who have dyslexia, it's not that simple. Their brain is not processing the sounds the way they should. They may have trouble saying syllables too. So for example, spaghetti might sound like pisgetti, right? So they kind of flip-flop the sounds and the syllables and words. They sometimes avoid letters or they confuse them. They can't recall the sounds of letters and they're unable to break words into separate speech sounds. And then moving on, the difficulty progresses with phonemic awareness. So you say, how many sounds are in cat? And they say one, because they hear one burst of energy coming out of their mouth. They think of that little thing with the whiskers and a tail that says meow. Phonemic awareness is a very abstract, high-level skill. And when we're walking down the street with our children, we don't say, oh, look at the cat, right? We say, look at the cat. So it's not something that we do every day. So it is difficult, but it must be taught intentionally. Then they have difficulty connecting those sounds with the letters, right, that they represent, which we know is phonics, spelling, they can't remember the sight words, and they have poor handwriting. Again, the sight words, and we're talking about irregular sight words here, poor phonics skills, poor spelling. And this is one that I always found working with children. They had poor recall for even what we would call the commonest little words. Like they might be able to read elephant, but they can't read an or with or why, right? So they have difficulty. And then again, the oral reading is slow and inaccurate. Again, the comprehension problems arise because if they can't read it, they can't understand it. The poor handwriting, again, impacts the written comprehension. So now they're starting to avoid reading and writing, and we're getting more stomach aches and headaches, and mommy, I don't want to go to school. And they get to school and they want to see the nurse. And this is where we have to start doing something fast. Right? And then grade 3 is sometimes called a transition grade, because usually after grade 3, we transition from learning to read to reading to learn. So by the time they're at the end of 3rd grade and going into 4th grade, teachers expect kids to read, right? Multisyllabic words, words in science and social studies textbooks. And then vocabulary is harder to determine because now they can't use context because now they can't read many words on a page. There are denser text, fewer pictures. And by the way, we don't want students to use pictures. We want kids to focus on the word. So again, longer assignments, more independence is expected. And this is where homework lasts for hours and parents and family members get frustrated, the child gets frustrated, and we end up with some behavioral issues perhaps. And then moving on to the intermediate grades, they're still very slow on anything to do with oral reading fluency. Still that inaccurate reading of real and nonsense words, or sometimes we call pseudo words, because they don't know the sounds and the letters that represent them. The poor spelling, handwriting, and written expression continues. There's more avoidance of reading and writing. Their strategies are weak. And then of course their comprehension, their reading comprehension is much weaker when compared to listening comprehension. So many times if teachers give an informal reading inventory and they give one passage and the child reads it themselves and asks questions, they may score very low. But then if the teacher reads it to them and asks the questions, the comprehension is very high. So that's the difference between the individual reading comprehension where the child reads it and the listening comprehension that someone else reads and they're just listening. I always say that's one of the best tests to find out if your child has some dyslexic characteristics. If you read it to them and they can understand it, it's not a comprehension problem. It's probably a decoding and phonemic awareness issue. Okay, and then of course, like we started to say, here's where the social and emotional consequences start coming, to be. So there's frustration, fear, anxiety, that learned or chronic helplessness. I can't do it. You know, I'm giving up. I throw in the chair. And I always remember there was a student who actually physically threw a chair in a classroom one year, many years ago, but I'll never forget it because he goes, I can't do this. This makes no sense. And there the chair went. Thank goodness nobody got hurt. But I feel so sorry for those students because, again, it's not like they don't want to do it. They want to, but they need the proper instruction and support. So again, they're going to avoid there's going to be avoidance behaviors or misbehaviors. They're going to have trouble expressing themselves in social situations. Other children may not choose them to be on their teams or in their groups, and then they start feeling inadequate. So those are all important things to remember. And then screening for dyslexia, we can do a whole session on this, and I believe Jessie is going to be talking about screening for dyslexia in another one of our monthly lunch and learns, but these are, you know, just some ideas of things that we screen specifically for dyslexia, and they all go together with what we've just talked about. So I'm going to scoot over that one. So what do we know? We know that the diagnosis is scientific, but the treatment is educational. So this means this is a good thing, right? I always said if I had to choose a disability for a child, dyslexia isn't the worst one out there, right? And not that we can choose, and I'm not taking that lightly, but what I'm trying to say is that there are things that we can do, and there's lots of strategies, and there's so much now with the science of reading, with structured literacy, that can help our students, which again, the problem is getting it out there to the right people, like teachers. All right, so again, I'm just going to give you a little bit again about the science of reading. If you are really into this and you want to find out more about it, this website, whatisthescienceofreading.org, just came out, I believe, a month, maybe 6 weeks ago. And this is the official definition that I read at the beginning. And again, this vast body of research didn't just come from the field of education. It came from psychology and neurosciences and speech pathology and school psychology and all the different areas that have an impact on reading and success, literacy success for our students. So, you know, if I had, you know, another 50 years to study, this is where I would go. I would really want to find out more about the neuroscience of reading because it really is fascinating. And we know that as far as the practical part of this, what does it look like when we see it in a classroom? It includes all these components. So the phonological and phonemic awareness, the phonics, structural analysis, spelling, fluency, vocabulary, text comprehension, and written expression. And I'm going to give you just a quick sample of an activity you can do for all of these in a couple of minutes. So don't go away. All right, now this is a cartoon version of the simple view of reading. So when we say the science of reading, that science of reading is based on all this research, but there are two reading models that everybody in the field is talking about these days. The first one is the simple view of reading, which really isn't that simple, but it actually came about back in 1986 by two researchers by the name of Goff and Tunmer, and it's become very popular these days, and I'm going to show you why. So if we look at reading comprehension, which is the goal and the essence of reading, right? If we didn't have to worry about understanding what we read, we wouldn't have to worry about anything I'm talking about today. But this is our goal. This is the essence. We want all our kids to get here. But to get here, this reading comprehension is the product of decoding times language comprehension, not plus, but multiply. So it's the product. So if we look at these as, let's give them a number of 0 or 1. So if our children have a 0 in decoding, which means they're having trouble sounding out words, word recognition, spelling, phonemic awareness, all the things we've been talking about, but their language comprehension or their listening comprehension as high level, so we'll give that a 1, 0 times 1 is still 0. And we can look at it the other way around. What if we have children who are really good with decoding? Anything you give them a medical journal and they can decode it, but their language or listening comprehension is 0. 1 times 0 is still 0. So both of these have to be intact to get good, effective reading comprehension. Okay, here's just another version of the simple view of reading. And again, if we look at the decoding, this is from actually my friend Dr. Kelly Farquharson from FSU, and she also is part of FCRR. She came up with this slide, but it's based on the work of Hogan, Adloff, and Alonso. So that first part here, that decoding piece, is the ability to translate printed text into pronounceable words. And then the listening or the language comprehension is the ability to understand text if it is heard instead of read. And then again, the product is the ability to understand text if both of these things are intact. And then as a speech pathologist, she talks about those students who have specific issues with articulation and with speech. They're dealing with this part of the simple view. And those who have trouble with language or developmental language, they have this listening or language piece, which is a problem. So, so that's the simple view of reading. And then to add to that, to show that it's really not that simple, we're going to use the model of Dr. Hollis Scarborough from 2001, which she calls the reading rope. And I just want to show you my little reading rope that I made with pipe cleaners, because just doing it and having, you know, my pre-service teachers do this or see me do it kind of brings it, you know, to a more hands-on way of thinking about this. So again, if we look at the bottom part, the word recognition piece here, whoops, which has to do with our phonological awareness, decoding, phonemic awareness, and spelling. So these are the three pieces of that part, right? The word recognition piece. And then the language comprehension part has 5 strands, which include background knowledge, vocabulary knowledge, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. And you'll see how this top part, the language or the listening comprehension piece, as it becomes twisted, right? It becomes increasingly strategic. As the bottom part, word recognition, is braided, we're braiding it, not just twisting it, it becomes increasingly automatic. And then when all these things are together, they become skilled reading, which is the fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension. So again, it's both parts of the simple view coming together. And I just want to read this one sentence from my friend Laura Stewart, who's part of the Reading League. She goes, when you braid, so again, when we're looking at the decoding part, the braiding part, she says it is very methodical, deliberate, sequential, first, second, third, and repetitive, just like we teach the foundational skills. However, the language comprehension strands are developed rather than taught explicitly. So the twist represents that, because that part continues, you know, forever and ever. We're still, even as adults, we're learning more about the world, you know, so our vocabulary is still increasing, our background knowledge is still increasing. Whereas in the word recognition piece, once you've got it, you pretty much, you have it, right? So that's the reading rope, which is the other model that we are, you know, most webinars talk about these two. Now, this just goes back to the basics, you know, so when we say the reading components are decoding and comprehension, I've always said for many, many years that the decoding is the means and the comprehension is the end. So if kids don't have this part, the phonemic awareness and the phonics and the spelling, they're never going to get to independent comprehension, which is the vocabulary and text comprehension. And this fluency here is the bridge between decoding and comprehension. So once these foundational skills are mastered or internalized, and our students start reading with fluency, then they can put all their brain power and energy into understanding what they're reading and building that vocabulary. And then the other thing I like to share is I call this my spectrum of reading disabilities. So on one side, we have what we're talking about today, our students with dyslexia, where their issues are more in the areas of phonemic awareness, phonics, spelling, and fluency. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have the students who are called hyperlexics or hyperlexia. And these are the students who have more difficulty with comprehension, with understanding concepts, vocabulary. So they can decode anything, but you ask them to answer a simple question and they have trouble doing it. So, you know, as teachers, we have to be prepared to teach every child in our classroom. But today we're just focusing on this piece. And then we have the ladder of reading, which I'm actually proud to say I'm using with permission from Nancy Young, who is going to be one of our speakers in August. So you may want to be on the lookout for Nancy's session. She's going to be talking about the twice exceptional student, our student with dyslexia and giftedness. And if you look at her ladder of reading that was updated just last year, you can see that about 5% of students learn to read in a sort of an effortless way. So no matter what we do in the classroom, their brain picks up on those patterns and they can read. And about 35%, it's relatively easy with broad instruction. So again, if they're getting good instruction, they're going to pick up on it. But again, they're still advantaged by a structured literacy approach. However, there's this big chunk of students here, 40 to 50%, who require a code-based, explicit, systematic, sequential instruction, which we call structured literacy. And then at the bottom here are 10 to 15% of students who are dyslexic. They require this type of instruction. It's critical, it's mandatory. But if we use structured literacy in our general ed classrooms, it'll work for everybody. It'll help everybody, which is really a great thing to be able to share with teachers. So now that we said structured literacy, well, what is it? It's actually the application of the science of reading. So we're getting all this research from all these researchers. And by the way, I'm not a researcher, I'm a teacher. So I appreciate all that research that's out there, but I want to know, what can I do about it? Back in the 70s, there was research that was not obviously anywhere close to what we have today. What they would do back then is they would do autopsies of people after they died and they knew they were struggling readers, and they would say, oh, this is how this brain looks versus a good reader's brain. And I always said, well, that's very interesting, but how does that help me as a classroom teacher? So now we have so much information about what we can do. So we want to apply the current science of reading in our classrooms. It's the most effective approach for all students, but especially for students who experience difficulty. It refers to both the content or the elements of what we're teaching and the methods or the principles, which I'll share with you in a minute. And like I just said, it benefits all students, but is vital for students with dyslexia. So any of you who are parents or teachers, and you can get to your administrators at your districts, please let me know, because I'm ready to march to Tallahassee to sit on the steps and plead for legislation to help our students with dyslexia. And I know most of you out there are willing to come with me, but we need more folks. We need people who can represent us. We need a lobbyist. I'm going to put that out there. Anybody who knows a lobbyist, please let me know. We need somebody who can get to that legislation and make these differences. By the way, this came from my all-time favorite researcher and author, Louisa Moats, in Perspectives from IDA. And then what does structured literacy do? It teaches oral and written language skills that we've been talking about in a very explicit, intentional, systematic, and multisensory manner. It integrates all those things we talked about, the listening, the speaking, the reading, and the writing. And again, since I like color highlighting, it emphasizes the structure of language across all the different systems. So the speech sound system is called phonology. And again, that's green for go, that happens first. The writing system, orthography, that's blue in phonics. The structure of sentences, which we know as syntax. The meaningful parts of words, or morphology. And I'm going to show you a strategy for prefixes, suffixes, and base words. The relationships among words, which is semantics, or basically comprehension, and the organization of written discourse, okay? So the way I like to remember it is PSS, MSS. And again, I'm putting the PSS in green, and that stands for phonology, sound symbol association, and syllables. These three pieces align with the simple view of reading and the reading rope in that part, those three strands that deal with word recognition. And then the MSS is the morphology, the syntax, and the semantics, which deals with those 5 parts of the reading rope that we call language comprehension. So this is the content, this is the elements that we need to incorporate in our classrooms, okay? And again, this is the foundation. And then with that, I included this little infographic that you'll have access to from IDA, and it just talks about each of those a little bit more. So, and then this is, for those of you who are really visual and like to see it in a visual format, that's basically the PSS, MSS. And then the principles or the methods of how we implement structured literacy in the classroom are explicit, systematic and cumulative, and diagnostic. So again, I've been saying these words over and over. It's intentional, it's direct teaching, it's teacher-student interaction, right? It's also, some people still use the word multisensory, but the new term that we're trying to incorporate is multimodal. And it's not just visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile, but it's also feeling the sounds of words in your mouth. And that's something that we want students to start understanding. Okay, so it's that using my mouth, my lips, my teeth, my tongue, my throat, my vocal cords to hear the sounds I'm reading and writing and spelling. Very, very important. And then systematic and cumulative, the organization of the materials follows a logical order. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but the state of Florida just went through an instructional materials adoption process this year. So everything is on the DOE if you want to take a peek at it. And they decided which publishers, which materials follow their rubric for the science of reading and the standards. There's new standards out. So for those of you who have children in school, or for the teachers who are in public schools, there's a lot of new stuff out there that we need to understand while we're, so we can meet the needs of all our students. And then again, it goes from easier to more difficult. And then each step is based on something that they've learned previously. So for example, if a child reads a regular literature book, the words that they see there may or may not be words that they've seen before or they've learned about, versus a decodable book or a book that only includes words that they've learned, would be beneficial for our students because they've already learned the pattern or the words, and then they get the opportunity to practice those words in connected text. And then of course it must be diagnostic, so the teacher can individualize instruction based on what the child is doing, right? So that's the methods and the principles. So again, that's the infographic that you can look at later. So now what I want to do is just stop for a couple of minutes and see if anyone has any questions, or Frank, if there's anything in the chat or the Q&A that I might be able to answer now. And then I'm going to go on with the strategies. This is kind of the what do I do about it part now coming up. Any questions or anything in the chat?
Doesn't look like anything anybody has. If anybody has a question, please either post it in the chat or in the Q&A. Okay, good. Well, in that case, I'm just going to take a sip of water, if that's okay with you. And you might want to start munching on your lunch because after all, this is lunch and learn. So, and we're going to just continue here. So again, the first part of our PSS, MSS, structured literacy, is called phonology. And again, the little picture, right, we're listening, and I'm going to share with you my ears that I like to do in presentations, just to remind everybody that this part of what we're talking about has to do with spoken language. So those are my ears. Phonology has to do with everything that's coming into my auditory system. So that's just a little visual to help you remember that the next few minutes will be about auditory, the sounds. So it's basically the study of the sound structure of spoken words. Some people call it the science of speech sounds. It's the rule system within a language that has to do with sounds. And again, speech sound system of a language. So depending on what dictionary or resource you use, it's just basically all about sounds. Okay, so let's just practice. And I know a lot of you know this because a lot of you said you could teach this, and I'm sure you could do this session probably better than I can, but because I volunteered to do it, I am going to follow through. So I'm going to ask you if you want to put in the chat or you want to just hold up how many fingers for your own benefit. How many sounds do you hear in the word box? I'm going to see if anybody's in the chat.
Oh, hi, Joanna. I see my Joanna from a long time ago is joining us. Okay, Mandy, you know it. You can't share because you know the answer, but that's okay. Now that everybody has seen it, we know that. Thank you, Mandy. There are 4 sounds in the word box, but usually when I do this in a larger audience or with pre-service teachers or even with veteran teachers, sometimes they say 1 because they think the question was how many syllables. So again, you can put your hand under your chin, and when your jaw drops, you know that's a syllable. So box is 1 syllable. A lot of times people say 2 because they know about onset and rhyme or word families. So they hear the b and the ox, right? A lot of times people say 3 because we see 3 letters and we just assume it's b, ox. But 4 is correct. So Mandy, you got it, and I hope everybody else hears that. But if you want to, say it with me. If we actually pull that apart and we listen to those individual sounds, those phonemes, listen to what we hear. We hear b, a, k, s. So that letter X represents 2 speech sounds, a k and a s. So I hope everybody heard that. So there are 4 phonemes in the word box. What about the word enough? Anybody want to put in the chat what you think, how many sounds are in enough? It's a risk-free environment. Nobody's getting graded for this or anything. So just take a guess, a good guess. Everybody's going to be shy today. All right, well, in that case, let's do it together, all right? So let's say enough, and we'll put a finger for every, put up a finger for every sound we hear. So we hear E, N, F. So how many sounds in enough? 4. Now let's go down to my bottom question. Since we're taking enough and we're breaking it apart, let's take my little magnets here, and let's try enough pushing a little. Yes, Frank. What happened here?
I'm sorry, everything's fine.
Oh, okay. You can hear me okay? Everything's all right? Okay, so if we take our little chips here and we push 1 for every sound and enough, we have E, N, F, right? 4 sounds. Now, who can say that backwards? So we have E, N, F. Backwards, it would be F, N, E, funny. So enough backwards is funny. Now, if we can do that like really, really fast, we as adults would be considered phonemically aware. Okay, we don't expect our little ones to do that. But if we had a room full of speech pathologists, I'm not sure if my Laura is on, but they would be able to do that probably, you know, less than a millisecond, because speech pathologists think sound, but most of us as adult teachers and parents, we think visual. So, but we have to bring it back down to the auditory level if we're teaching phonemic awareness. Okay, one more quick practice, precious. Let's do it together. P, sh, s. Right, so precious has 6 phonemes. We have to, again, pull them apart. Okay, so here's my little funnel, and here's my real funnel that I use in my presentations. You just have to humor me because I've just learned how to insert pictures and shapes. So I was able to get a funnel here, but here's my real funnel. And I like to think of phonological awareness as phonological awareness because it brings all the sounds of language into our auditory system, and it brings it in by different levels. So you start out with the largest or the widest part of my funnel would be the largest chunks of language. So that would be words and sentences. So before, when I said, how many words do you hear in the sentence, I like pizza? And then you could say, I like pizza, and it's 3 words. That would be at the top part of my funnel. And then as I move down, I have syllables, I have rhyming words. And then when I get down to this pink part of my funnel, which is the skinny part of my funnel here, we call that phonemic awareness. So phonemic awareness is like a subset of phonological awareness. They both have to do with sound, but when we get to this skinny part, the pink part of my funnel, we deal with those 44 individual phonemes or sounds. So again, phonological awareness deals with all the levels of sounds and syllables, including phonemic awareness. It's the sensitivity to those sounds, and it's the understanding of the different ways that oral language can be divided into smaller components and manipulated. So it includes words, rhymes, syllables, onset rhyme, and phonemes. And again, as soon as we get to that skinny piece, it's called phonemic awareness. So here again is our phonemic awareness pointing to that skinny part. And we know, since I already said that, a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound that distinguishes the meanings of spoken words. So if I say to you the word bat, and then I say, let's do that with our colored chips here. Okay, so suppose this is at bat, and I ask you to change it to boat. What's changing? This is, right? My vowel sound. So now a becomes o. Still three sounds, but oat. But because I changed one phoneme, it changed the meaning of that word from bat to boat. And this is what we do with our students, by the way, using manipulatives, blocks, chips, magnets to help them represent the sound without using letters. And like I said before, we have 44 sounds in English, 25 are consonants, and 18 are vowel sounds. We don't talk about the vowel letters, A, E, I, O, U, but we talk about vowel sounds. And then we have this funny looking thing that's called a schwa, which is the sound in an unaccented syllable, like about. In the word about, the first sound is considered a schwa. We can do a whole thing on that. In fact, somebody wrote a whole book on the schwa, but we're not going to get into that right now. But do know it's the most frequently used vowel sound in English, and most, well, I shouldn't say most, many teachers don't know what it is. So I'm just sticking it there for you. All right, now we know that when we get to that pink part of the funnel and we're at the phonemic awareness skill level, there's a whole developmental hierarchy. And again, that sequence of skills. So we start out with the easiest and we go to the most difficult. So for the beginning part, we're talking about isolation. So at this level, we might say, what's the first sound of mat? And the student would say, not M, but And then we have something called identity. So we would ask students, what is the same sound you hear in bag, ball, and bus? And they would be able to tell you the B. And I have to be careful not to say ba, because that's wrong. We want to clip it, and some sounds it's very difficult to just say it without adding a little bit of a vowel sound there. Categorization is when we ask which one is odd, or we say the odd one out. So we say milk, mop, and cat. And in this case, it's cat because milk and mop start with and cat starts with k. You have to be careful with these because sometimes kids tend to categorize by meaning. So for example, if you had milk, trying to think of another one that would be like a different animal. They may say the thing that's not the animal because they're grouping by category based on meaning. So, you have to be careful how you group your words and your question. Then comes blending, and you would say, tell me this word, and they put them together and say sun, which is very difficult for many kids. And then segmentation, or that breaking it apart. So you say, here's the word mat, tell me the sounds in mat, and they'll go at, if we're lucky, right? One of the things that I just wanted to share with you is a slinky. I don't know if you remember the old slinkies from many years ago. Now they make them in pretty colors. I love to use this as a little manipulative for segmenting and blending. So even beyond the phonemic awareness, when we do this with words. So if they're sounding out the word sun and they pull it apart and they go, now let's put it together. What was that word? Sun. So, just little manipulatives like that, hands-on objects help kids understand these kind of abstract high-level skills. And then manipulation is the most difficult. And this actually is what Dr. David Kilpatrick might call phonemic proficiency, that we should be able to do these skills, this higher level. I call it level 3 but it's the highest level. So can we say, for example, addition, add to the beginning of at. So you might say at, now say at, but put at the beginning, and they say met. And then deletion, say play, say it again, but don't say and see if they can say pay. That's very difficult for many of our students with dyslexia. Substitution, change, this is the one I showed you before. Change the at and bat to o and see if they can come up with boat. Now, many adults, when I do this, they'll say bot, because what we do as adults, because we're at that higher visual level, you spell bat in your head, and then I might say change the at to o, and you're thinking B-O-T, and you say bot. But I didn't say change it to ah, I said change it to o. So that's where we have to be careful. It's not the letter, the vowel letter, it's the sound that letter represents. And then reversal, which is a hard one, like enough backwards is funny. So if I said to you, say might backwards, you would say time, right? Which is very difficult. And if we use David Kilpatrick's book, Equipped for Reading Success, he says we should be able to do these, if we use his test, under 2 seconds. So this is important. This is important for parents to know what teachers should be teaching, and teachers should be able to incorporate this within their classrooms. Okay, and then here's just another example, kind of like using my little magnets on my board, but at the beginning level, we call these Elkonin boxes or sound boxes. We're only using these chips to represent sounds. So the student would slide the counters to represent the sounds they hear. So for example, if I said, how many sounds do you hear in fish? And they push the first chip and they go, f, I, sh, and they tell me 3 sounds, I say, great. Now, gradually, we start showing students what letters represent those sounds. Now, once we do this, it's not pure phonemic awareness anymore. Dr. Joe Torgerson might call this phonemic decoding. So now we're using the letter or letters to represent the speech. So if I said, what letter would you expect to see at the beginning of fish? And we can write that letter F, we're doing what's called phoneme grapheme mapping, right? And then I would be I, and then sh. Even though it's one sound, it's 2 letters. And I always told my students, you write the SH and then 1 line under it. So it's 2 letters, but it's 1 sound. And that's how we start making these connections to the print. So that's phonology. Then we move on to orthography, which orthography I'm really breaking down into sound symbol and syllables, right? So that PSS, we're still on this. So now is when we start introducing the letters that represent those sounds. So orthography is basically the writing and spelling system of a language, what it looks like. It's the system in which the sounds or phonemes are represented by written printed symbols or graphemes to spell words. Okay, and then I'm not going to read all this to you, but that sound symbol, which is that part of that PSS, this is what we incorporate, and this is how we teach. And this is an example of a scope and sequence of how you would introduce these different sounds and letter representations in a program. Again, most teachers are required to follow whatever curriculum is, required in their school. But I always tell my students, if you're stranded on a desert island somewhere and you want to teach a child how to read, you can do this with your finger in the sand. And I always remember Mrs. Frances McGlannon, shout out, may she rest in peace, taught us at McGlannon School that if you're a good teacher, you can teach a child to read with your finger in the sand. Okay, you don't have to have the latest technology and the latest books, but it's up to the teacher. And that's why I keep going back to professional development is the key to all this. So again, this would be an example, I guess, of a sound symbol association sequence, starting with the easiest and then going to the more difficult. Okay, and then why do we want to do this? Because it's the alphabetic principle, the alphabetic code. Why do we want to teach these sounds and symbols to our students? Whoops. Because we know that English is systematic and predictable, right? We said it's 85 to 88% predictable. So there is this relationship between the letters of the written language and the sounds of spoken language. We can say it's how print matches speech, or the relationship between phonology and orthography. And again, it's also known as the alphabetic code. So we want to teach the code. And one of my favorite sayings is we want to teach students how to conquer the code so that then they'll be able to master the meaning of comprehension, right? So that's our goal. And then this is just an example of what we call phoneme grapheme mapping. So if this is our word mat, and we want to show those sounds, at, and we put each letter or grapheme group of letters into the box that represents that sound. So mat has 3 sounds, and this one just happens to have 3 phonemes. The word strap, st, ap, has 5 phonemes and 5 letters, right? Now the word 3, e, only has 3 phonemes, even though it has 5 letters, but the th represents th, and the 2 e's together represent e. And then same thing with punch, p, n, ch. Even though it's 5 letters, it's only 4 phonemes because that ch sound is represented by 2 letters. Whoops. And then the word bright, b, r, I, t. In this case, that I sound is represented by 3 letters. So it's the grapheme IGH. And this is critical. If we have to get one thing across to our teachers, how to teach students how to go from sound to letter representations, I think this is a very, very important piece of that. Okay. And then we get to syllables. This is my new addition little here, my little spider. So we know syllables are, it could be a word or a part of a word that includes just one vowel sound. So in the word spider, spider, there are 2 syllables or 2 parts. And then syllable types help readers pronounce the vowel sound within each syllable. And we're going to look at those types in a minute. There are 6 basic syllable types. I definitely did not invent them. They've been around for many, many, many years. The unfortunate part is they were not included in most reading textbooks that were used in colleges and universities until fairly recently. They're also called, I call them vowel patterns, because for the children I worked with, I wanted them to focus on the vowel, the how many vowels and the position of the vowel in the word. Some people call them spelling patterns. And like I've been saying, English is 85 to 88% regular. So why not teach the regular parts before we worry about the parts that are irregular? So syllables are important. And again, if we had more time, I'd be happy to go through all these patterns and how I teach them. But just as an overview, we have closed words, and there's 3 questions to ask, okay? Is it 1 syllable? Cat? Cat, yes. Does it have 1 vowel? Yes. Is it followed by 1 or more consonants? Yes. Is the vowel short? Yes. So it's a closed word. An open word or an open pattern is when there's 1 vowel and it's at the end and it gets to say its name. So we have words like me and go, and the te syllable from table, from down here. And by the way, bub is the first syllable or word part from the word bubble. And then our silent E, we can go from a closed word like rid, and we add on our silent E and it becomes ride. Cap becomes cape. Hop becomes hope. And then we have what's called R control or boursier, where we have 1 vowel followed by R, where the R kind of changes the sound of that vowel. So it's not a, it's not a, it's R. So we have R, or, By the way, we're not worried about spelling patterns right now because the sound can be represented by ER, IR, or UR. And then we have most books and most folks call this vowel teams, T-E-A-M, and they are vowel teams because there are 2 vowels next to each other. But when I was at McLannan, we broke this up into talkers and whiners. I will accept credit for that part of the vowel pattern chart because it was easier for the kids to say, well, the talkers are when we have the 2 vowels together and the first one says its name and the second one closes his mouth and is quiet because he has good manners and lets the first guy say his name. So it's O, boat, E, meat. Whereas the whiners are what we call vowel diphthongs or vowel variants. So they're the oys and the ows and the oos and the ahs. And again, there are only 5 of them, but we're not going to get into great detail today. And then the consonant LE or the final stable syllable are in words like table. So I always told the kiddos that the LE gets out his fish hook, grabs the B or the consonant before it and cuts it. And that's where we actually took our scissors and we would cut the sentence strip, the word card, and then tay would go up in open because we know it's one vowel at the end, so it's long. It says its name, tay, and then we say the bull, table. And then this cuts here and it's bub, and then the LE grabs the consonant T, cuts it, and then ter goes in bossy R because it's one vowel followed by R. This is something that I would love, love, love to see in every classroom, not just in, Miami-Dade County where I live, but throughout Florida. I just think this helps so many children that I've worked with over the years. And again, it's so simple to teach and kids just eat it up. I had students at the end of the year that would say, give me a book, any book, and I can tell you all the closed, open, silent E, talkers, whiners, whatever in the book. And that's where we want kids to get to that internalized part where they see it. And it's not to help them. I mean, the idea is not to memorize these patterns. The idea is to let them see the pattern and read the word. Obviously, the bottom line is, can they read the word? And then can they use this with multisyllabic words? So then we move to syllable division. Again, don't have tons of time to go into great detail with this, but we have our what we call turtle words, which are our consonant LE. We already learned that in the vowel pattern chart or their syllable patterns, right? So in this word turtle, you see we have a bossy R syllable and a consonant LE syllable. In our what we call rabbit words, we have, again, VC is vowel consonant vowel. But again, a lot of kids have trouble when we do it this way because I have to remember vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel. So we call them rabbit words. And I'll show you how to break this up in a second. And then if we see the first chunk is closed, right? The second chunk is closed. So we read it rab-bit. Say it fast, rabbit. And then tiger, we have one vowel, one consonant, one vowel, where we break before that consonant. So we have tie open, gur, bossy R. And then we have camel, which, by the way, is I always call this plan A. Tiger words are plan A. There are many more tiger words than there are camel words. But first we try it this way. If it doesn't work, then we try it this way. And in this case, what I mean by if it doesn't make sense. So if I said K-mel, I would say, what's a K-mel? I never heard of that before. So again, we always want to focus on that. What does the word mean, right? It's not just sounding out for sounds, but it's to get what the word is. So K-mel doesn't make sense. So I move over one and say camel. And then the last one is, lion. And I'm not seeing that on mine, but it's lie on, lion. So then how do we do that? Here's our little strategy. And it took me really, really long to figure out how to do this on a PowerPoint. So we spot and dot the vowels. So in the word rabbit, we spot the vowel and dot it. We go to our next vowel, we spot it, we dot it, we connect the dots, okay? We look at how many consonants are between the vowels. If there's two, we break right between them. I always say like right between the eyeballs. And then we have rab-bit, rabbit. If there's only one consonant between them, like in our tiger words, we break right before it. So we have tiger, open, and bossy R. And that's how that works. And that works in very long multisyllabic words. I used to have a student in my class who was able to do bioluminescent using the spot and dot strategy. And it was very impressive. If we had a visitor in our room and she would say, let me show them bioluminescent, I can do it, I can do it. So it's not just for 2 and 3 syllable words, it works for very large multisyllabic words as well. Okay, I know it's already 12:30, so I'm not going to do this, but if you want to do it on your own, you can try to use the spot and dot strategy to divide those words, but here are the answers. So you can try that on your own, and this just means the type of vowel pattern or syllable type it is. So for example, in Atlantic, okay, it's a rabbit, so we split, and we have closed, Atlantic. The only thing I want to say about in a word like accommodate, when there is a silent E at the end, that stays together because it's a silent E pattern, or sometimes we call it a magic E pattern. And I put this strategy really helps spelling. Sometimes I'll have teachers say, oh, my students can read all those words. And then I say, can they spell them? And they'll say no. So I said this, if once kids can do this, it really does help their spelling. And by the way, in this syllable of accommodate, this is really a schwa. So it's a comma date, it's not a commodate. But if this were a spelling word, I would tell my students to practice it the way it's supposed to be, like open, and then they'll never misspell it. So it's date. But then when we say it fast, because we swish all our sounds together, speech pathologists call that co-articulation. I love that word. So when we say accommodate, we don't say date. But this absolutely helps students see those syllable chunks and put them together. Okay, real fast. Morphology is an orange. Okay, so now we get to that second part of our PSS, MSS, and this is the part of the simple view that is language comprehension or the reading rope. So when we talk about morphology, we're talking about meaningful units of language and how they're combined to form words. So this is when we study base words or root words and affixes, which we know as prefixes and suffixes. The little clue here is morphemes begin with M, so does the word meaning begins with M. So I always tell my students, remember that morphemes are the smallest units of meaning in a word. So for example, salamander, even though it's a really long word and it's salamander, it's 4 syllables, but it's really only one morpheme because it's only one unit of meaning. But the word boys, even though it's a short word, it's actually 2 morphemes because boy is 1, and then the S, which indicates plural, is another morpheme. So boys is 2. And then, what did I have under there? Reheated, I can't see it for some reason. See if I can minimize this. Anyway, all right, let me just say, for example, I think it's reheated, but I can't see it. It would be 3 morphemes because re would be the prefix and then the base word and then the suffix. So a prefix, a base word, or a root word, and a suffix, 3 morphemes. And then something we can do to teach this, a strategy, and I'm going to show you what it looks like if I were doing this with real kids in a classroom. So I could take my little magnetic board and I have my little prefixes. I don't know if you can see them in green, which I did not make. It came from reallygoodstuff.com, so I'm giving them credit. In yellow, you have the base word or the root word. And then in red, you see your suffixes. And so we can do activities with students and say, how many words can we make with these different parts, right? With our base or root word and our prefixes and suffixes. So if we take a word like heat, we can make the word reheats or reheated or reheating, right? And so forth. So that's just one strategy that we could use. And then you see here, again, prefixes in green, again, green for go, because it's at the beginning of the word, and suffixes are red, because red is for stop, and that's at the end of the word. So just by using something simple like manipulatives, like I showed you, or color highlighting, or draw a green box around the prefix, if you don't want to use the actual whole chunk in green or red. And by the way, what's the difference between a base and a root? A base is a word that can stand alone without a prefix, right? But a root is like spect, right? So it's the root of inspector. And again, we teach what the prefixes and suffixes mean. We can make charts of all the words we've come across that have specific, similar prefixes or suffixes. Okay, so that's that. And then we're going to move quickly to syntax. Syntax is in purple. It's the sequence of or order of words in a sentence. I found this little word cloud here about syntax. So it deals with grammar. It deals with sentence structure, the mechanics of language, the function of words, parts of speech. And just one little simple strategy that we can do for that is teach like subject and predicate. And even when I taught very young kids, I use subject and predicate, big words, big grown-up words. And subject, again, I did in green. And the subject always tells us what or who the sentence is about. And the predicate has the word read in it. So it's read, helps us remember. And the first word in the predicate is always the verb. So it's the doing part. So we might read a short passage and ask students to put these words in order to answer a question. So the question might be, where did the big dog run? And you give them little word cards with all these little words on them. And you say, now move them around to make a good complete sentence, and they come up with the big dog ran to the park. And you can either color highlight it in the beginning to support or provide scaffolding, and then eventually take the color away and see if they can still put the words in order to make a complete sentence, a sentence that makes sense. And then for semantics or comprehension, we're looking at meaning. So meaning in words, meaning in sentences, and finally, meaning in connected text. And this again is our goal or essence of reading, the comprehension of written language. This is where we want our kids to be able to do this independently. And here's just one of my favorite strategies that I learned from a colleague, Dr. Karis Cummins. And I have a big chart, but you can't see it in the little box. So what it is, she calls this a shape go map. And I love this. And I've used this with kids one-on-one, in small groups, even in a whole class situation. So you draw a triangle and you tell students that, and it's green, of course, because it's the beginning of the story. You tell them in the beginning of the story, we usually learn 3 things. We learn about the setting, the characters, and the problem. So we use a triangle because the triangle has 3 points or 3 sides. And I write a little S here for setting. And coming out of S for setting, I write when and where. And then after we read the story, we fill in. When did it happen? Where did it happen? And then here we write a little C for characters. And then we draw our little spokes coming out. Who were the characters, or what were the characters in the story? And then usually that leads us to a problem. So we write a P here. What is the problem in this story? And then we would just write a few words, a phrase, or a short sentence talking about the problem in the story. And then in the middle, the yellow for, in the middle, usually there are 4 main events. So we use a rectangle that has 4 sides or 4 points, and we write 1, 2, 3, 4. We go back to our story and we find 4 main events that happened in that story. And then the end obviously is in red. It's the solution or the conclusion to our story. We find how the problem that we noticed up here is solved. And Kara says what goes around comes around. So that's why it's a circle. And again, because it's color highlighted, it's a manipulative. I actually had like Velcro pieces of shapes, and kids love doing it and writing. And then once they take all those words or phrases, they put them into sentences, and depending on their age and grade ability, they can, create a sentence, a passage, a paragraph, and then retell their story. So phew, that was a lot of information. So let me just finish the PowerPoint and then we'll open it up for questions, and I will take another sip of water. But I want to share with you, because we believe that literacy is all about equity. And Dr. Anita Archer, who is amazing speaker, author. She has a wonderful book called Explicit Instruction. We use it for one of our courses at FIU for our special ed majors. She actually, I sent her an email, and she's one of these famous people that actually responds to you. And so we've learned to communicate with each other via email. And I wanted to share her message to teachers. And she goes, to have equality and equity, we must provide quality instruction to all students every year, every day, every period, every moment. That is our moral imperative. And if we could get that to our legislators and our administrators, I think, to have our message heard. And then, of course, Maya Angelou, who says, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And I think now it's up to us, right? We do know better. We have the science of reading. We have structured literacy. We know what to do, but now we just have to do it and get it into all our schools. And then a final thought, becoming literate is one of the most important journeys that your child will ever take. And you are the person who shares most of this journey with your child. Make it magical, meaningful, and memorable. And that's for all our parents out there as well as teachers. And we have to say night-night to little Jude. So this is the end. So I want to say thank you for your kind attention. Please feel free to contact me. Very easy email to remember. And I do have to let all my colleagues out there know that I have a 7:10 flight tonight to Houston to go see my little Jude, and I can't wait to get there. So I told Frank that was my reward for doing the presentation this morning. So just to let you know, I'm going to be a happy little grandma in a few hours. And then again, I just wanted to let you know, I put the links here for some infographics that you might like to check out, and then some websites of interest. And please check our IDA Florida branch for the record. I don't know if we're recording it, but for the PowerPoint and the other resources that we are going to share with you. And there we go. Questions. comments?
All
Water.
right, thank you, Judy. So we did have a question posted in the Q&A,
Mhm.
and this one is, I have Spanish-speaking parents that are afraid to read to their child because they're afraid that they will pronounce English words incorrectly. What are your thoughts, and how should we respond to these parents?
Well, first of all, I think they should speak and read in Spanish to, to maintain the primary language. And we know that once children understand and comprehend in their primary language, it's much easier to transition to English. And I think even if, they speak, if they want to read in English, I think the students will get beyond that. The children will get beyond that. And by the way, Elsa Cardenas-Hagen has a wonderful book, and I'm blanking out on the title right now. Frank, help me. I have it somewhere here, but it's specifically for English language learners and literacy. I would highly recommend that book for any teachers or educators who are working with children who are English language learners. But again, like I said from the beginning, our goal is to get language to our students very early on. And that language can be any language, primary language, second language. I even know some friends of mine who have children who speak like 3 different languages, and they know which grandparents or which family members to use which language with. So I don't know, I'm not an ELL expert, and I'd ask anybody else to chime in who would like to answer that as well. But I think as long as we're using language, sharing language with our children, that's what it's all about. Frank, did you want to add anything to that, or anybody else?
I just posted the book, which is Literacy Foundations for English Language Learners by Elsa Cardenas-Hagen, into the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, we do have another question. Nancy Wild is asking, is there a list of site approved programs for use to use for the areas of dyslexia?
Okay. We tend to be a little hesitant when we get to programs, and I can open that up for my colleagues to share that. But I'm going to just pull a few things out there that we know are really good programs. And again, I think you may want to go to the IDA main website for more information. But I know there are programs like Spire. I know like Mandy can speak about Spire. I know Super Kids is a program that's used in some schools in Miami that is very explicit, and it has a lot of decodables. There are lots of programs that, I mean, if you hear that they are Orton Gillingham based, or that they provide structured literacy instruction, but then again, you have to be careful because there are people who are using those terms a little bit loosely these days, and you want to be careful. It passes kind of the rubric of the science of reading. So you want to make sure it includes all those things that I talked about, with the PSS and the MSS, the phonology, the orthography, the morphology, and that it has that explicit, systematic, sequential instruction. Frank, did you want to put a few more programs out there that you're familiar with? Or anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, I'm familiar. I mean, I'm familiar with Wilson.
Wilson,
Oh,
right.
Nancy said, sorry, I meant to say state approved programs. Do we?
Okay. So what you need to do is, if you go to the Florida DOE and you search for ELA instructional materials, because I did this yesterday afternoon, you will find the list of programs that were just approved by the state. I believe just last week they were posted. And if you scroll down, there's actually a link where you can see the rubric that they use. They came up with this rubric 1 to 5 for science of reading. And I actually asked a question yesterday because I was on a webinar with DOE people, and I got kind of a vague answer, but they said they used this rubric. So I opened it up, and they decided based on the rubric, which I thought was a pretty good rubric actually, for the science of reading. And so all the programs that they reviewed, they used that rubric to decide if it is based on the science of reading. So they came up with programs like HMH, Wonders, things that have been used in the schools prior. But apparently there are new versions of, I know Wonders was approved for Miami-Dade, so I can speak to that one, but apparently it's supposed to be a new updated version that has more explicit instruction included in it, and it has decodables and manipulatives and, you know, a lot of good things. The other thing is the Hegarty program. I don't think it's on their adoption list, but I know that's a great program for pre-K and kindergarten, and I know there's a new one out called Bridge the Gap by Hegarty that is second grade and above. 5 to 10 minutes a day. It's amazing. And do you want me to write Hegarty?
I can do that, Judy.
Okay, there. And then also David Kilpatrick's book, Equipped for Reading Success. He has not just an assessment, but lots of for phonemic awareness, a little, like he calls them 1-minute activities. So those are good. Yeah, Mandy, I know there was a list of programs at one time. I'm not sure they're still out there. I'd have to check. I can check it and we can send it to everybody, Frank, if you want, as a follow-up. Again, Wilson Foundations and then the other Wilson Reading, but I don't know if those are all on the state approved list.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see them yesterday, but I'm gonna have to go back and look at them. Did I mention Reading Horizons? That was the one that Miami-Dade approved. I still go back to, I don't like to talk about programs as much as I like to talk about teacher professional development, because I think if a teacher knows a lot about reading and knows a lot about the science of reading and structured literacy, they should be able to take any program the state or the district mandates and tweak it to meet the needs of their students. That I really, really believe that. But if the teacher doesn't know it, they're just going to say do what the teacher guide suggests. And I know what happened in the past, because I know some of our classrooms that I was actually supervising student teachers, the teachers would say, oh, I love doing all these activities or using these strategies, but we don't have enough time because we have to do all this in the pacing guide. And what happened was teachers were kind of given the liberty to pick and choose what they wanted. So maybe they didn't feel comfortable teaching phonemic awareness or phonics, so they spent all their time teaching vocabulary and comprehension without including the foundational skills. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that might happen. So again, I really, really believe it's the professional development and the what the teacher knows. Thank you, Joanna, for agreeing on that.
Nancy also wanted to know, what is the best way to teach irregular sight words?
Oh, I love that question, because if you just go to reallygoodreading.com, they have something called heart words. And I love, love, love that strategy. So for example, yeah, Really Great Reading, I think it's .com, not .org. So you can teach a word like said. Okay, I'm going to use my little board here. Hopefully you can see this. So, and I know David Kilpatrick says this, that there are very few words in English that are totally irregular. Most words are off by one sound. So we know the word said is not said, right? It's said. So when kids go to write it, they'll write S-E-D because they hear the short E, right? So what they do, they call these heart words, and what they suggest is that we draw a heart around the part of the word that is unusual or different, and we teach the kids that that's the part they have to remember. So, and then, you practice it. The same thing with, enough, or any of those irregular words, again, that are off maybe by one sound. So they call them heart words, and I would recommend you check out that website. They do a really nice job on it, and there's a list of words, and they give examples on how to do this. And again, if we just teach kids that we already know, and the way they explain it there is really, really neat, because we would say, they would do like the phoneme grapheme mapping, and they would say, okay, said, what's the first sound you hear? S. What letter do we use? All right, S. Let's listen for the last sound. D. What letter do we use? D. So really, there's only one part that's kind of weird. So that one we have to learn by heart. And what I used to do for my kids, I would say the word say. Today I say, but yesterday I said. And that might give them a way to remember that there's the A in it. Okay. And again, sometimes because in English, our language came from so many different languages and we've kind of taken on the spelling, we have to remember that spelling is not just sound. Spelling is morphemes or meaning, and spelling is also based on the language of origin. I just did this last night with my class. And for example, why is the word sign, S-I-G-N? Most teachers would say, oh, there's just a silent G. No, because it comes from the word signal, and signal has a G in it. What about, why is the word two, the number two, T-W-O? Well, think of words like twin and 12 and 20, right? Those indicate something with a two. So if we teach kids these little like tricks, if you want, or the reason why they're spelled the way they are, I think it really helps them. And spelling has to go way beyond visual memory, and we have to teach why the words are the way they are. Another favorite one of mine is believe, because kids always spelled it the E first, because that's what they hear. They think it's a double vowel talker, but it's not. I always write the word out, believe, and underline the words L-I-E. And if you want someone to believe you, don't ever L-I-E lie to them. They will never misspell it. Or friend, F-R-I, Friday is the end of the week, and you can go home and play with your friend. You know, so there are little things that we can help kids to remember when it comes to that spelling and those irregular, what we're calling hard words. So I hope that helped a little bit. Probably more than you wanted to hear. Anything else? I thought 2 hours was going to be long, but I can keep going. That's a question. I'm sure everybody else is tired of listening. Anything else? No? Well, if not, I want to say thank you for those of you who gave up part of your Saturday and joined us. And I really encourage you to check our website for our upcoming seminars or webinars. And again, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday and a wonderful weekend. And we will see you soon. And thank you, Frank, for your assistance.
Thank you so much for the great presentation, Judy. And for those of you still on, our next presentation is going to be the second Saturday in May. It's going to be on assessment, and we will get this information onto our website by the beginning of the week. And we look forward to seeing you in future webinars.